right. Sound check. All right. I think the sound is okay. Let me just check. All right. All right. Welcome, everybody, to Can Hammer TV. It is February 25th. It is the day before my dad's birthday. So happy birthday to my dad for tomorrow. And heading into March now, light at the end of the tunnel for COVID. And we are here tonight with the 50th episode of Custodes Tactica, which is hard to believe. You can do 50 episodes talking about one faction, but you can. And we've done it. And I believe this might be the last deep dive. I'll have to look back. I think we haven't done the super heavies, not super heavies, the flyers. We could do one more episode covering the two flyers, but otherwise, this will be the penultimate unit deep dive episode, and then we're gonna start going into other things. So finally got it done until at least our book comes out, and then we probably have to do them all again. But for now, we've gotten to the end of the deep dive. So thanks for joining me, everybody, and thanks for watching. Tonight, as I say, we're going to be deep diving the Venatari. We kind of saved the best for last. And yeah, so I hope everyone's doing okay. Hope everyone's staying safe. Good news is our lockdown is over, and there's still a what's it called, curfew over on the Quebec side. So no nighttime games with Francois right now because he'd be illegally recrossing into Quebec after the curfew. But we're hoping to get the Day Hammer Thursday afternoon session going, not next week, the week after that, because Thursday afternoon is when I have to book a lot of appointments and things. Anyway, so in the next week or two, we will be getting the live games going again. It will be Dark Angels, the first opponent up, and we'll have to come up with a hard-hitting list to counter Dark Angels. So if you got ideas, share them on the Discord. You can join the Discord right there and join our community. So we're going to be doing that in the next week or two, reviewing. We're playing against Francois and, of course, Phil with his Necrons. So, and then at some point, I'll be getting these guys on the table, my Dark Angels, which I've been working on slowly. These are my Deathwing dudes, and yeah, so that's going to be cool if and when that ever happens. So we might as well dive straight into it. We're going to talk about Venatari tonight, and a very interesting unit, really, for almost a unit that kind of doesn't fit the mold of Custodes, and never has. And maybe that was a bad thing before, but maybe now it's a good thing. So, you know, the Venatari have had a pretty rocky history. They were first introduced, of course, in the beta rules for Forge World units, and pretty much dismissed outright because they didn't have 2-up save. And I was one of the people who dismissed them outright. And I did try them a couple of times. I bought them because they're cool models. I tried them a couple of times, and at that time in the game where there was much less AP flying around, you know, it was just like 2-up save. No 2-up save was like a liability. And they lacked punch. They had these short-range pistol weapons. And other than being fly and infantry, they didn't really have that much going for them at the time. And the game was less about board control than it is now. This is a different game, obviously, now. And you know, eventually Marine meta and stuff came out, and then there was a real survivability problem with everything rocking at least AP1. So they didn't really get a good go of it when they first came out. And slowly, over time, things have happened. And why they're so good now is a combination of things happening over time. They've gotten cheaper and cheaper. In fact, they were one of few units to not go up in the 9th edition points rise bonanza. In fact, it came down. They can we continued to have real other viable fast attack options until very recently. I mean, the Palace was okay, but bikes were overcosted still, and so only until recently has that changed. We got a new book, which gave us superior fire patterns, which seemed to be a stratagem almost specifically written for Venatari, and we'll talk about that later. In our new book, of course, was ways to protect the Venatari, so transhuman and grim responsibility. We had a new edition with more emphasis on board control, mobility, obsec, lots of -1 to hit terrain on the board, so less reliance on your own Vexilla, and the maintained good advantages for being fly and infantry, actions, so lots of reasons for them to get better in the new edition. They got, more recently, new rules for the buckler to give them that much wanted 2-up save. And there's been an increase in 2 wound models, which makes the 2 damage shooting really good. But now we've got -1 damage sneaking into the game, and maybe that's going to knock them back just a little bit. So we'll see. But basically a whole host of changes over the last year and a half slowly make them incrementally better, and then the new book and the new edition kind of push them over the edge. All right, so let's deep dive these guys. Okay. All right, so first, as always in the deep dive, we're going to talk about the models. So they are Forge World models. These guys are the Venatari with the pistols, and unfortunately, I can't show you the spear guys. I don't have any spear guys, but the spears kind of look like Guardian spears with the little pistol-y gun on them, and so they're pretty cool models. They're kind of jump pack dudes, really cool jump packs, way nicer than the Blood Angels ones, and they're cool. And they got these little bucklers, which I think are a little bit not great, and the pistols are cool. They're like old school with like a pop and lock and like a little barrel. Pretty cool. And of course, they, you can either jimmy them onto some system so you can avoid the flying stand, or actually these guys on the new flying stand are not too bad as long as you have good glue. They're not too bad on the new flying stands. So, so there we go. So these guys, unfortunately, being Forge World, of course, are $81 Canadian for 3. So that's a lot of money. So $160 for a basic unit, basically, compared to Aquilon that are $100 for 3. So they're cheaper than Aquilon. And of course, Dick Bikes, which are $65 each. So they're actually the cheapest Forge World units. Of course, there's the issue with flying stands, and I would highly recommend that if you can, you should magnetize them. So the buckler and the pistol come in 2 separate hands, and then the spears is like a hand on the spear and another hand. So you can easily magnetize them, although it's going to take you some time to do that. But probably magnetize them so that if in case you ever want to change, it is easy for you to do. And don't do what I did, which was, anyway, don't do what I did. But especially with how expensive they are, I mean, magnetize them if you can. You'll probably need 2 boxes at the minimum for a unit for 6 guys if you're going to run a unit of 5. And then, of course, if you want to run more guys, you're going to need 3 or 4 boxes, which is a pretty decent total. Almost the price of a decent-sized Custodes army to begin with. So they're not cheap, but they're nice. I've seen people convert those Blood Angels, golden dudes, whatever they're called, the Sanguinary Guard. That didn't look good. I've seen lots of conversion attempts, Vanguard Vets and stuff. I don't know. They don't look very good. And these guys have a similar aesthetic to like Aquilon, and so if you run with a lot of Forge World guys, like they fit in pretty well with the rest of the army. So they're pretty cool. So Okay, let's move on to role and keywords. Okay, so the role, these guys are in the fast attack slot, which previously was not particularly contested and now is hotly contested. In fact, now we're seeing bikes being played a lot more now because of their recent changes. Palace tanks obviously getting a bit of a run, and we're seeing now a lot more lists, including my recent lists, running Outriders because the battalion only has 3 slots, a patrol only has 2 slots, so it's hard to get fast attack slots if you're trying to run palace tanks and bikes and Venatari. And so, you know, the Outriders like seems to like the only other way of running them is by giving up 3 CP, which kind of sucks, but no, that's the way it is. I feel like battalions should have more than 3 slots, but anyway, that's how it is. Okay, so that's their role, which is becoming a competitive slot. So core. So they have core, which is great. Obviously, they're going to benefit from auras and strats and things like that in the future. So being core is always good. Infantry. So infantry, of course, always good. Interacting with terrain, moving in and out of terrain, getting rules from terrain, and doing actions and strats. Really good. And then you combine it with the next keyword, which is fly. So again, still one of the best keywords in the game. Makes them 12-inch fly. Infantry is one of the best combinations to have in the game of keywords. And there's very little anti-fly stuff in the game right now, in the meta right now. There's very little downside to being fly. And ability to move through dense cover, for example, without that -2 is like so good. And they're already fast. So in fly, infantry, super good combination to have. And these guys bring that. So jump pack, other than letting them deep strike, that keyword doesn't really give us anything right now. Neither does the Venatari keyword. We don't have any specific strats that point out Venatari, although the superior fire patterns pretty much points out Venatari, but not specifically. So we'll see. Okay, unit size. So you can take these guys in units up to 6, which is convenient because they come in boxes of 3. Oh, I wonder why that is. And it's too bad that happens like that. But anyway, and most people are going with units of 5. And because 5 gives you a good number in terms of board control, gives you a good number in terms of that unit sticks around, gives you a good number of shots and attacks. And but it doesn't give you 6, which would then get you into blast range, and also then Blood Games veterans cost 2 CP. So, and I presume that our transhuman is probably going to be something restrictive like that, and maybe cost cheaper like the Marine one does. So I think 5 is going to be the go-to size, which unfortunately means you have like one dude left over, but that's just the way it is. We'll talk a little bit later about alternative size units, but that is kind of the standard size unit right now. In fact, for many of our units, 5 is the magic number. And so it's the same for Venatari. Okay, stats. So stat-wise, they just have standard custodian stat line. And they are Venatari custodians, after all. So T5, 3 wounds, usual stuff, except they are 12-inch move because they have the jump packs. And they are the fastest infantry that we have. And their save is still technically 3-up save, but because of the buckler rule, gives them a 2-up save. Now, obviously, it would be very nice if the buckler if they just changed their save to 2-up and say, okay, fine, you can have 2-up save, like the rest of your whole army, and then made the buckler ignore AP1. That would have been the best combo. But we'll take it, and we can have dreams for the future. But yeah, so in effect, they're 2-up save from the buckler, but actually they're only 3-up save. And they still have the standard 3 attacks as of right now. Who knows what will happen in the future, but standard custodian number of attacks. Okay, so stat-wise, nothing particularly to write home about, just a standard custodian stat line. And of course, 4-up invul. Okay, so shooting. Let's go on to shooting. Okay, so they can get 2 weapons to shoot with. One, we'll talk about the spears first. So the spears are actually Venatari lances, but most people just call them spears. But so they are only 12-inch range, and this is in some way mitigated by smaller table and their mobility and the fact that they're assault weapons. So, you know, if you're going to run them, probably it's not going to be a huge impediment to be 12 inches, but it is significantly shorter. And of course, you -1 hit if you do that. 2 shots, okay. And 6 -2, 2 is a very nice shooting profile. Maybe it'd be nicer if it was -3, 2 damage, but 6 -2, 2. That's a nice middle of the range shooting profile for shooting things weaker and for shooting heavier things. But to shoot heavier things, you need more shots. So, but it's a nice profile. It's the same as the pistol profile. And these days, maybe 2 damage is taking a bit of a rap, depending on how much -1 damage factions you have in your local meta, being mostly Death Guard, Dark Angels right now. We'll see if -1 damage becomes a much wider, becomes available to a much wider number of factions. But -1 damage is very strong defensive buff. Okay, so that's the spears. Let's go on to talk about the pistols, or what are actually called the kinetic destroyers. So the pistols are great, 18-inch range, which is short, but for a pistol, that's super long. And it's plenty of range in the game today. And it's probably the longest range pistol in the game. There might be other ones that are the same, but I can't think of any pistols off the top of my head that are longer than 18 inches. Being pistol, of course, the big advantage of being pistol is that it can shoot when you're in combat, which is amazing, but actually doesn't actually come up that often. Lots of people still fall back, and so you don't often get to shoot into combat, especially when people hear about what you can do with them in combat with the pistols. So they tend to fall out, and they also tend to want to shoot your Venatari, so they get out so they can shoot them. So I've maybe done that just like a couple of times using pistols in combat. I think when I've been stuck in with Necron warriors. But yeah, it's great though, but it doesn't happen that often. 2 shots again for the pistols, same as the spear, but of course you can use superior fire patterns, which we'll talk about in a second. Now that superior fire patterns, or SFP, superior fire patterns, the stratagem specifically says rapid fire weapons or pistols. And considering they're the only people that have pistols in our entire faction, this stratagem seems like it was written for Venatari. And rightly so, because with superior fire patterns, these pistols are killers. So the pistols, not only that, so they become 4 shots. They explode on 6s. So I have Terraces all can hammer. Mini Wargaming, welcome. So exploding on 6s with 4 shots apiece, that's good. And then the 6s also give you extra hits, not extra rolls. So that's good at just adding in your rare misses, to be honest. So hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, exploding 6s means you're usually getting more than your original number of shots, which is always a feel-bad moment when you're getting hit by such a weapon. To be like, okay, you shot me 20 times, but somehow you hit me 25 times. How does that happen? But anyway, that's always good. And then, of course, 6 -2, 2 damage. As usual, nice profile for everybody other than Dark Angels and Death Guard now. But so it's a very nice profile. And wounds all horde type things on 3s or 2s, because there are a decent number of shots for shooting hordes. And against heavy infantry, usually wounding on 3s, and making the saves 4 up or worse. So that's a decent shooting. 2 damage is a Primaris killer for those factions that don't have -1 damage. You're just whacking Primaris Marines down left, right, and center. It's slightly less efficient against 3 wounds, but our army doesn't have a ton of 3 damage shooting. So, putting 2 damage in, at least you can do that math pretty easily versus like a D3 damage or something like that. And it's offset a little bit by the fact that it's ballistic skill 2, often re-rolling 1, so it's basically auto hitting and then exploding 6s. So you offset that inefficiency a little bit, by that. Just in time for all the old school Marines to go up to 2 wounds. So it's great for killing those old school Marines as well. And So this profile also can plink wounds off tougher things. So tanks, vehicles, knights, it can do that. In fact, 5 Venatari of mine have easily taken out a tank commander before, which is T8, 12 or 14 wounds or whatever it is. So it's pretty good at killing those kind of things if you invest 1 or 2 CP. And then if you put blood game vets in on when you're shooting at harder targets, that can really help as well. So it's a really versatile shooting, and it has enough shots. 4 shots a guy, so that's 20 shots on a unit of 5. So 20 shots that are auto hitting, probably giving you anywhere from 21 to 24 hits. That's pretty good. It's very good. And right now, -1 damage kind of sucks. It changes it into a last round bolt cannon, basically 6 -2, 1 damage, and that last round bolt cannons kind of suck. So that makes it a lot worse. So I think we may be starting to see, depending on what kind of people play against, we might be starting to see, we were going to like 2 units, 3 units of Venatari, maybe we're dropping it back down to 1 unit, but they're still excellent against everybody else. But if all you're going to play against is Death Guard and Dark Angels, then maybe your Venatari lost a little bit of value. Of course, they have other things to shoot too, so you can pick your targets. They'll still kill Poxwalkers with -1 damage, no problem. And so big blob of Poxwalkers might be a great target for Venatari. Just not gonna do much against those Death Shroud guys, or Mortarion for that matter. Okay, so yeah, the pistols are great. Now, so which should we take, spears or pistols? Well, it's hard to just say this comparison just on the basis of the gun, because the gun comes with the shield, which gives you the 2-up save. Whereas if you want the spear, you don't get 2-up save. So you have to take those, the survivability and the shooting come together, versus the spear, which is worse shooting and doesn't give you the survivability. So that's the big downside of taking spears, and that's probably why we don't see anybody taking spears. If you got the 2-up save regardless, then really it's a case of, okay, what do I want them shooting versus what do I want them hitting in combat? Then you could really make a case for the melee unit. But, I mean, when you have to trade away the survivability as well, that becomes a tough sell. So, yeah. Okay, so overall, at this time, I don't feel there's any reason to take the spears. You would take pistols and shields all the time. And yeah, we have other units that can do combat. We don't need the Venatari to be really good at that kind of combat. They're good at other forms of combat, which we're going to talk about next. Okay, so now melee. So they're not a melee unit, but they have 3 attacks, and if you pick your targets appropriately, they can be very effective. So they're good at killing little things. 1 wound things, maybe 2 wound things, small number of 2 wound things, or like swarms, nurglings, scarabs. They're good at killing that stuff. 10-man unit, guardsmen, warriors, small marines, killing characters off. Small OPSEC units on backfield, nurgling scarabs, stuff like that. They're really good at meleeing those kind of units and trying to stay safe from shooting and not really taking much damage in return. And so that's the kind of guys you want them meleeing if you're running shield and bucklers. They're still good at wrapping things because of mobility and fly, and so you can still do that and force your opponent to spend the 2 CP. And if not, then you're safe and you pistol the guys to death in your next turn, then you can still charge something else. So that's still a good thing to try and aim for the wrap on the Venatari. But yeah, it's just harder to do these days, and your opponent has ways of getting out. But still a good strategy. 3 attacks, as always, for our whole faction, basically kind of sucky right now. If you have the points for a dagger, that really helps them be 25% better in melee. It gives them 4 attacks, basically. They're almost exactly the same. And they're decent attacks, strength 5 or 6, -2, 1 damage. So 4 attacks each now becomes pretty good. That's 20 attacks versus just 15 attacks. And they're quality attacks that will take down those kind of things that you'll be fighting them with. Now, unfortunately, with the change to where we stand, we fight putting daggers on all of them takes them up to 290 points for 5, which now brings them into contention of being one of your top 3 expensive units, which may or may not matter, as we're going to talk about later, but something to think about. Whereas if you had 15 extra points before, I always put daggers on my Venatari because that just makes them hit way harder in combat. Okay. So spears. Okay, so spears are better in combat. So they give you an extra attack, and they're flat 2 damage. So they go to 4 attacks base, and they're strength 6, -3, flat 2. So you can't argue that the spear is better in combat. But, you give up the 2-up save, and that's the big thing, and your shooting is not as good. So if you really want a 12-inch moving fly infantry combat unit that hopefully not going to be taking that much firepower, then you could run a unit of spears, and they will do way more in melee, like good damage, and can take on heavy infantry and stuff for you then. But they're going to be less survivable on the fight back. So I mean, there's no arguing that spears are better just in terms of what they do in combat, but as I say, you have to weigh up the armor save difference. But I think if you're taking a unit of shooty pistol guys, they're going to do work for you in melee. You just have to choose your targets carefully. So you go up, you shoot one harder unit, you kill that unit, and then you charge into like 10 guardsmen, wrap them up, get onto their objective, whittle them down to 2 or 3 guys, make them fail in morale. That's what they can do. Or if you whittle down your big unit down to like 1 or 2 guys left, charge into that unit, finish them off. So they're very flexible unit because of these profiles. And so just do the math in your head and figure out which is the better target for you to hit. Okay. And, because of their melee is not super, super stellar, this is a kind of unit where you kill something in shooting and then you feel like you don't need to charge something with them. Like they're not being wasted by not charging. And that's okay. Okay, so abilities and rules. Okay, so obviously we talked about the buckler already. So the buckler used to be a turns AP1 to AP0. But back then, that just wasn't that good because there wasn't a huge amount of AP around, not as much as there is these days. Everything's flying around with at least -1 AP now. And so back then, you were just on 3-up save all the time. It just did not feel good to be on 3-up save. Hitting on 3 sucks. It's for scrubs. 3-up save sucks. And so I think that's why the buckler just didn't cut it for people. And then also the pistol wasn't that great back then. But as the game has progressed, everybody's throwing out AP, extra AP, and so the rule doesn't really matter anymore. You're generally on 3-up save anyway, or 4-up invuln, and so the kind of ignore AP thing for them, no 2-up save, didn't really matter that much anymore. But now that it actually does give up the 2-up save, it does matter because now AP1 just takes up to the 3-up that we had before. And now there's a lot of cover everywhere. There's -1 terrain everywhere. And so actually the 2-up save, nobody argued that the 2-up save is not better than ignore AP1. And it would be great, of course, as I mentioned, if we had 2-up save and could ignore AP1, but we'll take the 2-up save. And now 2-up save, in cover, 1-up save. So, and that's paying dividends for lots of armies in terms of Terminators. So, and like the rest of our army. So I think the buckler change was definitely needed. Okay, so they are OBSEC, of course, which is super important for a fast-moving fly infantry unit. It being one of the units that often ends up in your opponent's deployment zone, grabbing those faraway objectives, contesting them, harassing their backlines. Super important that they're OBSEC. Very, very important, especially later in the game. Okay, and of course, deep strike. So being jump pack guys, they get native ability to deep strike. Obviously, that's good for flexibility, although these days, I can't remember the last time I deep struck my Venatari. They're just so much better on the table, exerting a presence, projecting force to the middle of the table, doing actions for you in the first couple of turns, and they're so fast that you don't really need to deep strike them. But they have that flexibility if you need, or if you're running like a small unit, as we'll talk about later, you might use that option. It should be really cool if the jump pack allowed them to infiltrate, because that would be cool to like just come in off the board edge. Okay, so points. So they are 55 points all in, doesn't matter what weapons you choose, and that's actually an amazing point value. When they first came out, the pistol and shield Venatari was 66 points, and spears was 62 points. And they were just too expensive. Of course, everything in our army was more expensive back then, including guardians and things like that. But they dropped to 55 points in the recent change. I think they were 60 or something before, or they were 50 something what you had to pay or something like that. I can't remember. But now 55 points all in, regardless what you take, is a great point value. And that's very competitive within our own faction. So Shield Guardians are 52 points each. Sagittarum are 53 points with a Misericordia. So, they're right in the mix with our troop units there, which is a really nice place to be because then that really does give you a true choice. So there's 275 points for 5 of them. And which often, unless you're running big unit of bikes or Terminators, that's one of your more expensive units. Interestingly enough, 5 shield guards with daggers is 275. The Telemon with 1 Arachnus Storm Cannon is 275. So all those things you could engineer to be 275. And I had this list going at one point where I had 6 units. They were all 275 points. So I could pick my where we stand depending on who I was playing against and who was most likely to die. So that's an interesting way that all those points have ended up the same. But putting daggers on your shield guardians also feels like a waste, but it's only 15 points. So throwing daggers onto them makes them 290. So if you're not worried about where we stand, we fight, then, and you have 15 extra points, as I said, the daggers on these guys is really a nice place to put them, and daggers that you will use all the time. So in terms of while we stand, we fight, I think they are fine as those targets. They are basically like tough enough. With Transhuman, Grim Responsibility, they are tough enough. I mean, in my last game before the lockdown, they survived, 5 Blade Guard vets, turn 3, White Scars, charging them with the Transhuman. They survived, and 3 of the guys, they only lost 1.5 guys. They flew off and did something else. And so that they can survive if you have the CP to protect them. And then they can definitely run and hide and save you that 5 points. So it's very easy to just hide one jump back dude. And they can move, 12 plus advance to get out of the way. So I think it's fine if it's one of your while we stand, we fight targets. They're obviously a little bit more fragile than Terminators and by definition more fragile than bikes, but they're fine. So overall, I think they're in a good spot points-wise right now. Obviously, I'd like them to drop another point or 2, but I think 55 points is very fair for what they bring right now, and I don't see them really dropping. And so now it really, as I mentioned at the beginning, it brings that internal conflict in when you're making a list and you want fast attack, but you also want troops. And then now, but they're all very similar points wise. What do you want? Do you want a shooty stag unit? Do you want a guardian unit? Do you want Venatari? Do you want all of them? Like that really brings in these hard choices when you list build. And actually that's good. That means that internally our faction is quite nicely balanced at the moment. They're still significantly cheaper than bikes. So bikes are 30 points more expensive. So as the alternative fast attack unit, they do have slightly different roles. And there's pros and cons to both. But the bikes are still quite expensive compared to Venatari. And I think that's something to definitely think about. Okay, let's talk about some comparables. So again, the comparable section is always difficult because we have so few units and there's such an elite army that it's very hard to compare our units to other factions' units because they have 3 times the number of units to do things, and sometimes they don't need to be both survivable and killing and all that sort of thing. Often our comparables are drawn to Marines because they're pretty survivable and they hit hard, and Marines have gotten more elite over time. But the comparables is always difficult, so we do our best. So I'm trying to compare them to other kind of fast-moving, jump, fly, shooty units. So the first unit that comes to mind, of course, is Inceptors. So Inceptors these days are 50 points with the Plasma. I haven't seen anybody running the Assault Bolter Inceptors at this time. But with the Plasma Inceptors, they're 50 points each. So that's pretty comparable. 50 points, 55 points, 5-point difference there. And they obviously jump pack moving, fly guys. They're T5, 3 wounds. and they can deep strike. They only have a 3-up save. Technically, we only have a 3-up save, but in effect, we have 2-up save. They don't have invulns generally, and they are only ballistic skill 3. We're ballistic skill 2, and on 1s, they die. And we don't die on a 1. The counter to all that, of course, is that they shoot a shit ton of plasma, and those are better shots than our pistols. So each guy, I think, is shooting 2d3 or something, and they're blasts. So that's on average a similar number of shots as we have of better shots. So they do shoot harder, and of course Marines have a lot of rules and strats and all these sort of things. So I think points-wise, it's a nice comparison because they're pretty similar, and I would say like we compare pretty favorably to Inceptors, just datasheet to datasheet. Although they have a lot more stuff to give to them right now than we have to give to our guys. But I would take, I think it's very comparable, and for the 5 extra points to have that extra survivability is actually quite nice. So I think that is the best comparable, actually, comparing Venatari to Plasma Inceptors. And I would say they do a pretty similar amount of hardcore shooting damage when you put a couple of CP into either unit. So it's pretty good. I'm glad that we compare well to Inceptors. So here's an interesting comparison. Attack Bike. So an attack bike is 45 points, 55 points on the dot with a multi-melta. So you could compare one attack bike to one Venatari. The attack bike moves 12 inches, doesn't fly, of course, is not infantry, and it's completely different weapons, so it's hard to compare a multi-melta with our Venatari pistols. But this is an interesting comparison of something that's 55 points. Attack bikes are pretty topical right now with Dark Angels because they're basically kind of hitting on 2s, and not really hitting on 2s, but sometimes like in effect hitting on 2s. And Melta is all the bomb these days, and obviously the multi-melta shooting is a bit better against like Mortarion and stuff like that. So that's an interesting comparison because they're both 55 points. Of course, there are 4 wounds. We're 3 wounds. They're T5, I think, so we're T5 as well. And they, of course, 3-up save, no invuln. And we are 2-up, 4-up. So, and we're ballistic skill 2, so we're going to be hitting more. So actually, it's a nice comparison there. So just comparing to Eradicators. Eradicators are 45 points. Of course, they're not fly, jump, infantry, or anything like that. But, they're 45 points for a bunch of Melta. Just thought I'd bring that up. So Sisters is hard to compare. Like they have fast moving shooty type units. They have all their jump pack units, the Zephyrim and the Sephirim and the little stupid dangly girls, and like they have a lot of those kind of units. They obviously have a lot of shooting like Retributors and things like that. But it's hard to compare them because they're so much weaker and you take them in larger units and they're so much cheaper. So it's really kind of a difficult comparison. When people need shooting like this in drop units, sometimes people are going to Scions. And obviously, again, difficult comparison because they're a lot weaker and a lot cheaper per body and bringing plasma. But that's a nice, interesting comparison. I don't know much about Noise Marines. I know they're only 16 points a model, but they seem like they're really shooty and they have some strats that let them shoot twice and all this sort of thing. But that's an interesting unit. Skyweavers are 45 points each. Haywire, all that sort of stuff. And Tomb Blades are 30 points each, and you can take them in units of 3 to 9. Different kind of shooting, but another kind of fast-moving biker type unit at 30 points each. So in general, it seems like most of the comparable fast-moving, fast-attack shooty units are around 25 to 50 points. And so we pay a little bit extra for Ballistic Skill 2, which is almost exclusively for, like, nobody else has that. Ballistic Skill 2, a 2-up save, and 4-up invuln. So I feel like we actually compare very well against similar units like that across the factions. So that's probably why the Venatari, they're well pointed at 55 points, and they do a lot for their point value, especially as you look across other comparators. So they're looking pretty good there. Okay. So stratagems. Okay, so in terms of stratagems that you would be using on Venatari or consider using. So We'll just go through them all, of course, that will apply. So Grim Responsibility, as we've said before on other Tacticas, is slightly less useful on T5 as it is on T7, 8, and T6, but still usable if you need it, and it's very good. In terms of running them in Shadowkeepers, I mean, people just run them in Shadowkeepers because they're just playing Shadowkeepers, but some people have been running them in emissaries in a separate second patrol or something like that to ignore modifiers. So that's an interesting way of running them. Obviously, if you're going to deep strike them and you want to homer or golden light them or whatever, then you can use those strats if they apply. Although if you're just coming in to shoot something, you might not need to get closer than 9 inches, or maybe you even want to stay at max range to stay safe or behind a shield wall. So you got to keep that in mind. You don't have to drop just outside 9. Emperor's Hand, so that's just from Emissaries, and so Emperor's Hand lets you ignoring modifiers, -1s to hit. Wound modifiers are very common these days, and cover obviously very good because only -2 AP. So Emperor's Hand is a pretty good stratagem to put on Venatari if you need to. Now then you're spending an extra 1 for superior fire patterns, maybe an extra 1 for Blood Game Vet. So now you're spending 3 CP. While to kill like a unit, which, so do the math in your head. It may not be worthwhile for you to spend all that CP. Unflinching. So in a pinch, if you really wanted to overwatch something, these guys would be a decent target for that, although you cannot use superior fire patterns in Overwatch. So just 2 shots each, but I guess it would work okay depending on what's charging you. Tanglefoot, of course, these guys are infantry, so they are a fast, mobile source of Tanglefoot, which is great. Put Tanglefoot all over the board. Ever Vigilant, again, they're infantry, so they can use our Interceptor stratagem. As always, I think 2 CP is too steep for this, and you can't superior fire patterns that, but, it's an option. Indomitable Guardians, as usual, you can use them to interrupt if you really need. Like that game against Francois where they could not kill those Inceptors, and they were standing on the objective, and so that was worth using Indomitable Guardians. So that was a good example. Spark of Divinity, Fortress of Willpower, as usual. These are ways you can protect them from psychic powers. And our Transhuman, Arcane Genetic Alchemy, obviously, is probably going to be the most common defensive strat that you use on them to save them when they get attacked. Slayer of Nightmares, as always, I feel like it's too expensive for 2 CP, and unless you're using spears, I don't feel like you would ever want to use this using your bucklers in combat for 2 CP. So if you're running a big unit of spear guys and you're trying to kill like a knight or something, then that might be worthwhile. Probably worthwhile then, but definitely not with buckler dudes. Oh, superior fire pattern. So probably the 2 most common units to use this on would be the Aquilon with the Lastrum and the Venatari. So some people didn't even like taking Aquilon with Venatari in the same list because they didn't want this internal conflict of who should I use superior fire patterns on. Actually, I quite liked having that choice of which unit wanted it. When I was running double Venatari, I was like, which unit am I going to use superior fire patterns on? And that sometimes was a difficult decision. And you had to do the math in your head. But definitely, I mean, this stratagem for rapid fire weapons and pistols, it was like, oh, okay, this is a direct shout out. They want this to be used with Venatari. And boy, this is made them so good. And so especially with the exploding 6s, it's great. So if you're running a unit of 5 pistol dudes, I mean, you're basically saving yourself 2 to 3 CP over the course of the game to use superior fire patterns. Now, okay, Emperor's Old Spice is something that's easy to use on them if you need to. Blood Game Veterans. So this is another common strat, often comboed with superior fire patterns to make them extra good, especially if you're shooting at tougher targets. So if you're shooting at anything that's going to make you wound on 5s or even 4s, arguably, like being able to auto wound on 6, which already gives you an extra hit, is a really nice combo. Don't forget that extra hit you still have to roll to wound. You can't Blood Games Vet on the Exploding 6. So that's really nice, and so keep that in mind. Again, another reason why you stick to only 5-man instead of 6-man, so your Blood Game Vets is only 1 CP. Fraternity of Heroes. Don't forget this strat. I've seen so many games online recently. People forget that they can heroic with this strat. And it's such a good strat. It really catches people out, and especially since you're OBSEC, it can really flip an objective for you if they're trying to fall back but stay in the objectives, so they're still within 3 inches. You just heroic and ruin their plans. So such a good strat. Don't forget it on Venatari. Especially when they're like in your opponent's zone fighting for their objectives and they got like 10 guardsmen trying to hold that objective or something. Like, so good, so good. Okay, so play. So I think most people running Venatari are running 5-man pistol shield units and just using superior fire patterns liberally, some Blood Games Vets, and just shooting the shit out of things. And that definitely works. And I've killed everything from, guardsmen to sisters units to tank commanders with a unit of 5 guys. They're just so good. Slowly over time, we have seen units of 2 units of 5 Venatari. I've seen lists with 3 units, and I've also started to see now lists with a big unit and then smaller units. And I think these are all valid ways. Now, with all the -1 damage maybe coming into the meta, maybe we'll start paring that back to just 1 unit and then, taking stuff that has a bit higher damage profile. But I think still a unit of Venatari should be a serious consideration in most lists because it gives you so much. They give you shooting. Okay, we know that already. But they give you board control, 5 dudes that can spread out, hold a lot of space, and can move 12 inches. Board control. They give you secondaries, help you get engaged on all fronts, help you get line breaker. They can obsec, so they can grab midfield and contest opponent objectives at the end of the game. So if you can, their speed, relative toughness, very shooty. They're so good for all sorts of things. And they're just a perfect complement unit that we needed against, a backdrop of like Terminators and like Telemons and like Shield Wall. We have all these things that are kind of holding, but we needed something to kill, and so they kind of filled that slot very well. Now you could argue for bikes too, because they've gone down, but they're still pretty expensive, and it's just 1 salvo shot. So I think they actually complement bikes. They don't fight. They're not competing against bikes, although they are competing for slots. So maybe that's why we've been seeing so many Outriders, is because we want bikes and we want Venatari. And but a unit of Venatari, 5 Venatari, so good for so many things. Every time they've always been MVP. At least one of the MVPs in almost every game that they've played in. Sometimes they've outright been the reason I won that game. Not only from killing things, but from board control reasons, from doing things like scramblers, so the infantry, so they can do actions, doing that last scrambler for me, or just soaking up way more firepower than the opponent thinks that they should, and being a real nuisance to deal with. And so that is such value in that you can't put into a points value in a game, just being such a distraction for your opponents to try and deal with. So deployment-wise, I think they're always on the table. I mean, unless you're playing against an army with a lot of out-of-line-of-sight shooting or some way of touching them in the first turn, I don't think there's a real reason to deep strike them. You want them on the table, projecting force, board control through projection of force, and actual board control, getting onto the midfield, hiding, jumping rune to rune. They're so good at that, and then taking shots at things at decent range. And I think, like bikes, don't be over aggressive with them. Don't sacrifice them or suicide them first turn or second turn, unless you're a really good reason to, like I did in that White Scars game. Like, don't suicide them. Just like bikes, don't suicide them. Once you hit turn 3, a 4 or 5 man unit of Venatari will be really, really hard to deal with, and will do so many things for you. So really try to keep them in reroll range too. They really benefit from Trajan reroll ones as well as reroll ones to wound. So good for them. And obviously -1 to hit from the Magnifica or from dense covers really helps them survive too. But you have to be a little bit cagey with them in the first couple of turns, be a little bit surgical how you strike early game, and then mid to late game, they're going to really pay dividends for you as your opponent struggles to deal with them, and they still have a lot of damage potential, as well as mobility. If you can get to turn 3 with a full unit of Venatari or like 4 guys, you're looking like in a really good position, just like bikes. And they get harder and harder to deal with as the game goes on. Now, the corollary of that is that they really lose punch as they lose people. Considering they didn't have a lot of melee punch to begin with, they lose a lot of melee once you lose 1 or 2 guys, and the shooting really drops off. Once you lose 1 guy, now you're down to like 16 shots, and then when you're down to 2 guys, now you're only at 12 shots, and then they really struggle. And then you start to think whether it's worth using superior fire patterns. Without superior fire patterns, it becomes completely useless, 6 shots. So it's like, okay, so it's a double-edged argument. So you kind of need them to make them do anything. But then it's like, okay, I would suggest once you get down to about 3 guys, you change the way you play them then. They're no longer a hammer unit. They are now your harassment, pain in the ass unit. You go into your opponent's backfield, contest their back objectives, pick on the characters and the little 5-man units at the back, turn them into a harassment unit, not a hammer unit once they're down to 3 people, and don't let them die, especially if they're your wherever stand, obviously. But just make them survive to the end of the game, make your opponent go out of their way to deal with you if they want to deal with you. Let your other units carry on the hammer function and turn them into a real pain in the ass unit once they get down to about 3 guys. So that's how I would suggest you use your Venatari once they start taking casualties. Okay. So the more recent concept is a 3-man unit. So I think a list could work with just 1 unit of 3 Venatari, depending on the rest of your list. But if you want a unit of 3 dudes to just hop around the table, pot shots at things, not really using up much of your CP, requiring some amount of commitment to take out by your opponent if they want to, getting you objectives, getting you engaged, getting or even deep striking into your backline, for Linebreaker and stuff like that with an Alaris captain or something. I think that's a neat idea. And I need to try that myself. But I think, by turn 3, turn 4, a 3-man unit becomes very hard to deal with, as I've seen in my games. So I think having a 3-man unit from the beginning that maybe deep strikes would be a really interesting idea. A lot of people are running an Alaris captain just to get secondaries, dropping in the backfields. Sometimes they run that with 3 Shield Guardians. Don't run it with Shield Guardians. Run it with 3 Venataris around the same price. And those guys are super mobile. They have way more shooting. And you got the captain there for melee. You don't need them to be super melee heavy. So it's actually like a cool alternative to the 3 Shield Guardian dropping in with your Alaris captain. So that's an interesting other way of using a Venatari as a small unit. If you have a unit of 5, you could also run a second unit of like 3 or 4 guys. Personally, I feel like if you're going to run 4 guys, you might as well just run 2 big units of 5. But you could run 3 guys and 5 guys, and they have different roles. So that would be really interesting concept as well. Again, fast attack slots, but if you're already running an Outrider, you should be okay. So that's another cool way, I think, of running Venatari as a small harassment unit. And we talked about that back then when we talked about Shield Guardians too. They're really good at getting us secondaries. So they're often a While We Stand, We Fight unit, which is great. They are very good at getting us engaged on all fronts, obviously. Decent at getting Linebreaker if that's what you intend them to do. They're obviously a great unit for scramblers and often the unit to get you that opponent's zone scrambler. So you don't have to infiltrate sisters or anything like that. So they're good for scramblers. And they're good at killing units for the kill secondaries. They can kill vehicles. They can snipe characters if you get behind a character with a bunch of pistols in their face. So they're actually really good for our game for playing the mission and for playing secondaries. They're great at sneaking objectives to get, hold more and stuff like that. So I think they're just really good with how we need to play the game to win these days. Okay. So overall, one of the stronger units in our book right now, for sure. Some would argue the strongest. I think that's a fair argument. It just depends on what you want, but definitely one of the strongest units in our book right now. And so use them. All right, questions in the chat, post them up. We will go to the Discord too. I'm going to go back on the Discord to like a couple of weeks ago because most of the questions were back then. Let's see. Okay, those were bike questions. Okay, here we go. Okay, what are the best, worst targets and roles for Venatari? So we kind of discussed that. What would push you to start them on and off board? We discussed that. Given Forge World availability, what are good conversions? We sort of discussed that. I don't think there are good conversions, but like you could look at the Blood Angels, Vanguard Vets, maybe even like, dare I say it, like Marines, but like the armor is not the same, and I don't know. It's a difficult one. I haven't looked into third-party Venatari conversions, but yeah. Are Misericordias good or worth it? So we talked about that for sure. Question in the chat from Isaac. What do you think is better, 4 bikes or 4 Venatari? Well, I think that's difficult. I think they're actually complementary because they're hitting different things. I mean, assuming your 4 bikes are running salvos, I mean, that's what you're going to be hitting like Mortarion with, or taking out rhinos and things like that. I mean, Venatari can take out a rhino, but you probably got better things for them to shoot at. So salvo, again, trying to compare pistols to Melta is like a little bit difficult. Also, 4 bikes is more expensive. It's like 2 Venataris worth more points than 4 Venatari. So, that's a serious consideration for points wise. I think the 2 are very complementary, actually. If you playing fast attack heavy, a unit of bikes and a unit of Venatari give you 2 very difficult units for your opponent to deal with. And people love shooting bikes first, and so you get those bikes to soak up all the damage while your Venatari go unmolested. So I think it's a nice combo, actually, running both. Sean, I'm bringing Venatari for the first time this weekend. Congratulations. Planning on a unit 5 and a unit 3. Think the unit 5 could handle Thunderwolf Cavalry. You'll have to remind me what Thunderwolf Cavalry do, but I think they could handle anybody. Although you don't want to get smacked too many times with Thunder Hammers. But yeah, nobody wants to get smacked too many times with Thunder Hammers. But I think it should be fine against anybody. Okay, against what type of army would you choose Venatari over bikes? So we kind of talked about that a little bit. Now, I think Venatari, I think bikes will be better against all the -1 damage armies. Even Melta, you will need Archaeotech to do good against -1 damage armies. But the Venatari pistols would definitely suck, for sure. And no way of making them better against those armies. So if you run into a lot of Dark Angels and Death Guard, you might be running more bikes than Venatari. Sean Stryker, T5, 4 wounds, 4++. Well, that sounds perfect for pistols because 2 pistols takes 1 guy out, and 4+ invuln, and wounding on 3s. It sounds perfect. If our book gives us a way to get AP and or strength on Hurricane Bolters, does FPP go to bikes? I don't think you can use FPP superior fire patterns on bikes. I can't remember. But I'm pretty sure you can't because that would make 120 shots is stupid. Obviously, if we get -1 AP on Hurricane Bolters, then bikes have just gone up a lot in value. I mean, being able to put out 60 shots at AP1 becomes a much different equation to just AP0 shots. Much, much different. So we'll have to talk about that if that happens. But so far, GW has resisted giving our Hurricane Bolters any kind of Marine buff. So I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But yeah, I mean, if you comparing 60 Hurricane Bolter shots with AP1 to 20 Venatari pistol shots, then yeah, the Hurricane bolt 60 shots for sure. I mean, it's yeah. So should Venatari be thought of as an independent unit, as in not needing captain support? So they totally can, and that's why they're so good. Is you don't need the support; they can do whatever they want, especially if you have lots of terrain to give you that -1 to hit as well. They can be really good because they don't suffer the penalties sitting in there, and they get the -1 to hit. That's a really nice combo. Not need of Exilla for that. Obviously, rerolling ones to hit and wound is super nice, but they can totally be independent. All right. What type of army? Okay, what meta changes would push us away from Venatari? Obviously, -1 damage. That's a big one. -1 to wound hurts as well. And that's why some people are taking the emissaries. So, yeah. What metas are Spiritari worth it? I don't really think they're particularly worth it in any meta over the pistols. How good is EI with Venatari? So I haven't tested it. I think occasionally it would be good. If EI ignored -1 damage, that would be super sweet, but it doesn't. So it's something that I've been wanting to test, the double patrol with the Venatari in the EI detachment and all the dreads in the Shadowkeepers detachment. Do you like to stock? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Do you prefer your Venatari on the board? Deep Strike answered that already. On the board for sure. Should we be using them to poke and run or full out engage? So I think I hinted at that a little bit. Definitely you don't want to get them bogged down, because if they have to fall back, they cannot shoot, and that's their biggest thing. So if it's a choice between charging and getting bogged down and not charging, then I would not charge. But certainly they are just a shooty unit. You should play them as such until they drop to 3 guys and then do a poke and run strategy. 5-man block or 2 3s. So I think both are valid right now, actually. And I have a concept list of MSU Custodes, 3-man Venataris, 3-man bike squads, min like Terminator units, like 3-man, like just MSU vehicles, dreadnoughts. Like I want to try that, how that'll work. If you think about it, like using superior fire patterns on a 4-man unit versus a 5-man unit, you're only losing like 4 shots. So it's not that huge a difference. So I think it's worth testing. How terrain affects Venatari. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking there on the Discord, but basically because they're infantry, they get all the benefits of terrain. So, and a unit of Venatari sitting in dense cover is like so good. You get auto Vexilla, and they move without penalty. Like it's a great place for them to hang out. Protoculture asks about 20 questions. How much would you pay for Venatari? Money or points? So I think 55 points is fine. How much -1 damage are you seeing? Well, we haven't played in months, so I don't know yet, but Francois is bringing -1 damage Deathwing in a couple of weeks, and Nick has Death Guard going, so I think I'm going to see a lot of it. How much 0+ saves in light cover? Not a lot. Yeah, decent amount. We have 6 to 8 runes on all our tables. Have you ever used Land Skies? No. Deep Strike or Start on the board. BGV I only use generally if I'm shooting tougher targets. How many Venatari is too many? I feel like probably 2 units is probably too many now, depending on your meta. Let's see. Do they usually survive to the end of the game? Yes, I rarely lose a whole unit of Venatari, actually. And it takes the opponent a lot to take them out. Do you rely on them for scramblers? So if I pick scramblers, I generally do. They're either the first turn scrambler or they're the midfield scrambler, and they're often the only way of getting the end zone scrambler. Should you rely on them? I guess. I don't know. When do you sacrifice them? Never. How many times have you shot pistols into combat after being charged and see your opponent's face look like this? Yeah. Most people forget about pistol rule regardless. Okay, let's see. Exploring 6 takes the edge off not being in range of rerolls. Yes. What are your thoughts on their stands? So, I mean, I think the stands are okay. I mean, I don't think you should go way out of your way to change them. If you travel a lot, then you may want a sturdier proposition. But if you're just playing like me, like in the basement, shelf table, it's not a big deal. Otherwise, like you just have to like make your own solution. You could use a rod, so rods are good. Or you could make sculptural bases like I did there, and that I used like for inceptors. Like yeah, like you can come up with solutions. If you do sculptor base, so just make sure that they're the same height as the normal flight stands. Okay. If there's like 1 or 2 guys left, they're fine for scramblers. Yeah, so turn 5, 1 guy left, 2 guys left, just fly into your opponent's zone and do a scramble. Like, boom. And often nothing your opponent can do about that. Okay. So, thanks very much, guys, for listening and for watching. Thank you for your support, for following, for subscribing to the channel. Join the Patreon, join the Discord, consider Patreon. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. And so I guess we'll do one more deep dive on the 2 flyers. And maybe I'll just spend an hour just zooming them around on the screen like this. That's as deep as we'll go into the flyers. And then look out for next week's schedule. Hopefully we're going to get a game in next week, maybe one evening with Phil. And then the week after that, we'll get a day hammer in with Francois. So look out for that. Thanks very much for watching, you guys. We will see you guys next time.